She woke up in a locked storage room, wrists bound, salt water dripping from the pipes above her head. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and rust. Her head throbbed, her vision blurred, and somewhere on this cruise ship, the man who had promised her love, who had whispered sweet words about second chances and growing old together, was selling her life away to the highest bidder. This isn't fiction. This isn't a thriller you pause when it gets too intense. This happened in international waters, where laws blur and predators thrive, and it all began with a simple message on a dating app, a message that seemed innocent, hopeful, maybe even heaven-sent. But before we go any further, before we uncover how a 57-year-old widow from a quiet suburb in Georgia ended up fighting for her life on a luxury cruise liner, I need you to do something for me. Look at your screen right now and imagine this. What if the next person you trusted, the next person who made you smile after years of loneliness, was the very person planning your disappearance? Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Now, let me take you back 3 months before that storage room, before the terror, before the realization that sometimes the people we let into our hearts are the ones who destroy us from the inside out. Her name was Margaret Hayes. 57 years old, silver-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much grief too soon. She was a retired nurse who had spent 32 years of her life caring for strangers in hospital corridors, holding hands during final breaths, and comforting families when words were never enough. But when her husband died suddenly from a massive heart attack in their living room one Tuesday afternoon, Margaret realized she had spent so much time caring for others that she forgot how to care for herself. The silence in her house became deafening. The routines they shared, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks around the block, Sunday crosswords, all of it vanished in an instant. Her daughter lived 2 states away with a family of her own, and while they talked often, Margaret didn't want to burden her with the depth of her loneliness. So, she did what millions of people do in the digital age. She joined a dating site for seniors, not out of desperation, but out of a fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. That's where she met him. Daniel Brooks. 51 years old or so, his profile said. A self-described international furniture dealer who traveled between the States and the Caribbean. His profile picture showed a man with salt and pepper hair, a warm smile, and eyes that seemed to understand pain. He said he was a widower too, that he knew what it felt like to wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. He asked about her favorite books, her grandchildren, the small joys she was rediscovering. He didn't rush, he didn't push, he listened, and for a woman who had felt invisible for 2 years, being seen again felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. They messaged every day, good morning texts with coffee cup emojis, late-night voice messages where he'd talk about the ocean, about second chances, about how life was too short to live in fear. Margaret found herself smiling again, laughing at his jokes, staying up past midnight just to hear his voice. Her friends noticed the change. Her daughter noticed too, but with concern rather than joy. When Margaret mentioned she was talking to someone online, her daughter's first question wasn't about his personality, it was about his intentions. But Margaret was defensive. She wasn't naive, she insisted. She had raised 2 children, survived decades in a hospital's emergency room, and buried the love of her life. She knew how to read people, or so she thought. Because what Margaret didn't know, what none of us can ever fully know when we meet someone through a screen, is that Daniel Brooks wasn't looking for companionship. He wasn't searching for someone to share sunsets and quiet dinners with. He was hunting. And he had been doing this for a long time. The red flags were there, subtle but present, like cracks in a foundation that only show when the weight becomes unbearable. Daniel never wanted to video chat. He always had an excuse: poor internet connection in the islands, a broken camera, a busy work schedule. He asked questions about her finances, carefully, casually, disguised as concern. How was she managing after her husband's passing? Did she have support? Was she comfortable? And he flattered her constantly, excessively, in ways that felt almost rehearsed. But Margaret, like so many of us, saw what she wanted to see. She saw kindness where there was calculation. She saw romance where there was manipulation. And when he invited her on a Caribbean cruise, she thought it was a dream coming true. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. 2 months into their online relationship, Daniel sent her a message that made her heart race. He said he wanted to meet her in person, that he had been thinking about her constantly, and that he wanted to do something special. He had booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise departing from Miami, and he wanted her to join him, all expenses paid, tickets, cabin, everything. He said he wanted to show her that life could still be magical, that she deserved to be celebrated. Margaret stared at that message for a long time. Part of her was thrilled. Another part, a quieter, deeper part, whispered warnings she didn't want to hear. She told her daughter about the invitation. The reaction was immediate and firm. "Mom, please don't go. You've never even met this man in person. What if he's not who he says he is?" Margaret tried to reassure her. She'd be in public, on a ship with thousands of people, with security and staff everywhere. What could possibly go wrong? Her best friend was even more direct. "Don't let him hold your passport, Margaret. Keep your documents with you at all times, and make sure someone knows where you are every single day." Margaret promised she would, but deep down, she felt her loved ones were being overprotective, paranoid even. She wanted this. She wanted to feel alive again, to feel wanted, to believe that her story could have a beautiful second act. The flight to Miami was surreal. Margaret hadn't traveled alone in years, and the mix of excitement and nervousness made her hands tremble as she checked her luggage. Daniel had sent her the cruise itinerary, the boarding passes, everything organized and legitimate looking. He said he'd meet her at the port, that he couldn't wait to finally hold her hand. When she arrived at the bustling Miami cruise terminal, the sheer scale of the ship took her breath away. It was a floating city, gleaming white against the blue sky, with decks stacked high and music already playing from somewhere deep inside. And there he was, Daniel Brooks, standing near the check-in area, holding a bouquet of white roses, smiling that same smile from his photos. He looked exactly like his pictures, which was a relief Margaret didn't realize she'd been holding on to. They hugged, and for a moment, all her doubts melted away. He smelled like cologne and confidence. He complimented her dress, took her carry-on bag, and guided her through the boarding process with ease. But there was something she noticed, something small that made her stomach tighten just a fraction. When they handed over their documents, Daniel took her passport along with his and dealt with the crew member himself. "I'll keep these safe in the cabin," he said with a reassuring smile. "One less thing for you to worry about." The first 2 days were exactly what Margaret had hoped for. They dined at elegant restaurants with ocean views, danced under string lights on the upper deck, and watched the sun set over endless water. Daniel was attentive, charming, always holding her hand, always making her feel like the only woman in the world. But by the 3rd day, small things began to shift. His tone changed when she mentioned wanting to call her daughter from one of the port stops. "Why do you need to check in so often?" he asked, not angry, but with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "You're on vacation. Let yourself enjoy it." She laughed it off, but the comment stuck with her. That evening, as they walked past the crew areas near the lower decks, Margaret heard something that made her pause. 2 men were talking in low voices near a storage room entrance. One of them said, in accented English, "Room 412 delivery tomorrow night." Margaret's room was 412. She stopped walking, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. Daniel appeared beside her almost instantly, his hand firm on her elbow. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, his smile tight. "I was just looking around," she said, trying to keep her voice light. He guided her away, back toward the main corridors, and the rest of the evening felt different. The warmth was gone. In its place was something she couldn't name yet, but it felt cold, and it felt wrong. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the conversation she'd overheard, the way Daniel's demeanor had shifted, the way he always seemed to be watching her. She decided she would call her daughter first thing in the morning when they docked at the next port. But she never got the chance. The next evening, Daniel suggested they have a quiet dinner in the cabin. He ordered room service, poured her a glass of red wine, and toasted to new beginnings. Margaret drank, grateful for the gesture, trying to silence the unease that had been building inside her. But within 20 minutes her vision started to blur. Her limbs felt heavy. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The last thing she remembered was Daniel's face, no longer smiling, no longer kind, just watching her as the room spun into darkness. When she woke up, everything had changed. The room was different, smaller, darker. The smell of salt water and rust was overwhelming. Her wrists were bound with zip ties, rough and tight against her skin. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to scream, her throat was too dry, her voice too weak. She was in a storage room, somewhere deep in the belly of the ship, and she was alone. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time became meaningless in the darkness. Then she heard voices. 2 men, speaking in Spanish, their tones casual, transactional. She pressed her ear against the cold metal wall and listened. One of them said something about Jamaica, about a buyer, about timing. And then she heard a third voice, one she recognized instantly. Daniel. He was coordinating with them, confirming details, talking about her like she was cargo. Margaret's entire body went cold. This wasn't a kidnapping. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was planned. She had been targeted, groomed, lured onto this ship, and now she was being sold. The realization hit her like a wave, crushing and absolute. She wanted to scream, to cry, to give up. But then, somewhere deep inside, a different voice emerged. The voice of a woman who had survived loss, who had held dying patients and told them to fight, who had raised children and buried a husband and kept going when it would have been easier to stop. She wasn't going to die in this room. Not like this. Not for him. Margaret forced herself to focus. Her wrists were bound, but the zip ties weren't impossibly tight. She started moving her hands, twisting, searching for anything sharp in the dark. Her fingers found a broken piece of metal piping near the wall, jagged and cold. She worked slowly, methodically, sawing the plastic against the edge, ignoring the pain as it cut into her skin. It took what felt like hours, but finally the tie snapped. Her hands were free. She sat there in the dark, breathing hard, her wrists bleeding, but alive. She listened. The voices had moved away, but she could hear the hum of the ship's engines, the distant sound of footsteps above. She had to move. She had to find someone, anyone, who could help. Margaret stood on shaking legs and felt her way to the door. It was locked from the outside, but there was a gap at the bottom, just enough to let in a sliver of light. She pounded on the door, weakly at first, then harder, using everything she had left. No one came, but she didn't stop. She kept hitting that door, over and over, until her hands were numb and her voice was raw. Then a miracle. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Margaret pressed her face against the gap and screamed, "Help me! Please, someone help me!" The footsteps stopped. There was a long, terrifying pause. Then a voice, uncertain, asked in accented English, "Who is in there?" "I've been kidnapped," Margaret gasped. "Please, you have to help me. Call security. Call someone. Please." The crew member, a young man named Carlos who worked in maintenance, stood frozen on the other side of that door. He had heard rumors, whispers among the staff about strange activity, about passengers who went missing, about crew members who were told not to ask questions. But he had never seen proof. Until now. Carlos made a choice. He radioed security, and within minutes, the corridor was flooded with people. The door was unlocked, and Margaret stumbled out, shaking, bleeding, barely able to stand. Paramedics were called. the ship's security team swarmed the area. And somewhere above deck, Daniel Brooks realized his time had run out. He tried to disappear into the crowd, tried to blend in with the other passengers, but the ship's surveillance had already flagged him. Coast Guard units were contacted, and by the time the ship docked, federal agents were waiting. Daniel was arrested on the dock, along with 2 crew members who had been working with him. The investigation that followed uncovered something far larger than anyone had imagined. Daniel Brooks wasn't his real name. His real name was Victor Reyes, a man with a long history of fraud, identity theft, and connections to an international trafficking network that used cruise ships as transit points. Margaret wasn't the first woman he had targeted. She was the 5th. 2 others had been found, traumatized but alive, in different countries. 2 were still missing. The cruise line faced massive scrutiny, lawsuits, and a complete overhaul of their security protocols. But for Margaret, none of that mattered in the immediate aftermath. She was airlifted to a hospital in Miami, treated for dehydration, minor injuries, and shock. Her daughter flew in immediately, and when they finally held each other, neither could speak. They just cried, holding on like the world might tear them apart again if they let go. Margaret spent weeks recovering, not just physically, but emotionally. She testified against Victor and his accomplices, her voice steady despite the trauma, determined that no one else would suffer what she had. Victor Reyes was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The trafficking network was dismantled, though authorities believe other cells still exist. Margaret's testimony was key in exposing how these predators operate, how they exploit loneliness, trust, and the basic human desire to be loved. Months later, Margaret sat in her living room, the same room where her husband had died, and she realized something. She had survived 2 of the worst losses a person can face: the death of the man she loved, and the betrayal of the man she almost trusted. But she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. Her daughter asked her once, "Mom, how did you do it? How did you keep going in that room?" Margaret thought for a long time before answering. "Because I remembered who I was before all of this. I was a nurse. I was a mother. I was someone who didn't give up on people, and I couldn't give up on myself." Her story made national headlines, not because it was unique, but because it was terrifyingly common. Every year, thousands of people are targeted online, manipulated, and trafficked. Many are women over 50, widows, divorcees, people society assumes are too old to be victims. But predators know better. They know that loneliness doesn't have an age limit, and neither does vulnerability. Margaret became an advocate, speaking at senior centers, churches, and online safety seminars, sharing her story not for pity, but for protection. She wanted people to know the signs, the refusal to video chat, the too good to be true offers, the isolation tactics, the control over documents and communication. She wanted people to trust their instincts, to listen to that quiet voice that says something isn't right, even when your heart wants to believe otherwise. Today, Margaret is 70 years old. She still lives in Georgia, still has coffee on her porch, still talks to her grandchildren every Sunday. But she's different now. Stronger, sharper, more aware of the world's dangers, but also more grateful for its beauty. She didn't let what happened to her define her, but she did let it refine her. And every time she tells her story, she ends with the same question. What would you have done? Not in judgment, but in genuine curiosity. Because the truth is, most of us don't know. Most of us think we'd see the signs, that we'd be smarter, more cautious. But love, or even the illusion of it, can make us blind. Loneliness can make us reckless. And hope, beautiful, dangerous hope, can lead us straight into the arms of someone who never deserved it. So I'll ask you now, what would you have done if you were in Margaret's place? If you were lonely, grieving, and someone finally made you feel seen again, would you have gone on that cruise? Let us know in the comments. And if this story shook you, if it made you think twice about the people you trust online, then share it. Because somewhere right now, someone is getting a message from a stranger, Someone is being told they're special, that they deserve a second chance, that love is just a plane ticket away. And maybe, just maybe, hearing Margaret's story will save their life.